Chapter 10. Where is that human? Samil grumbled. Talon had left before the sun had fully set. Now darkness enveloped the forest, broken only by the slivers of light from the red and silver moons, where they could be seen through the canopy of trees. Surely it did not take that long to gather wood for a fire. Samil sighed, sure that Talon had run off again. On top of all the other problems she had now, must she keep track of where the human was at all times? Samil looked at his selenary, the silver moon. She would wait until it was directly overhead, and then she would go and search for the human. She chuckled. All she would need to do to find the human was to hit herself a few times and follow the screams. A sudden pain struck Samil's head. With the pain came elation. Has the spell been broken? Samil touched her head, still sticky with blood, but there was no tenderness where she touched the wound from this afternoon. The curse must not have been undone after all. Talon must have been hurt. Now she had to go find her. Muttering a few choice ephetics in Draconic about humans, she walked about the forest. The human had walked to the east, so Samil followed suit. She couldn't have gone too far. Not as slowly as humans moved. Samil followed the girl's tracks, though perhaps not as well as she could have if she learned to track land creatures back when Uncle Nubar had tried to teach her during one of his lectures on humans. She hadn't paid attention, declaring that she wanted nothing to do with land animals that they trafficked with humans. But Samil had keen eyes and a sharp sense of smell, and she thought she was doing a pretty good job when the track suddenly ended at a patch of torn grass and a broken branch. There were other tracks here, tracks that didn't look human in origin. It looked like Talon had been captured here, then dragged elsewhere. Much as the human annoyed Samil, she knew she had to find Talon. If whatever took her was the thing that was hurting her, it could turn an already bad situation into a downright dangerous one. A few bats flew overhead. Samil looked at them with envy. So many small creatures around her could fly, but she couldn't. She wasn't sure how flying would affect her if Talon wasn't with her, but it seemed too risky to try. The last thing she wanted was to crash while looking for that annoying human. Small creatures. Perhaps one of them saw what happened to Talon. Samil looked around for something small that was unlikely to have moved. She spotted a squirrel, looking much like Samil must have looked when she took that form, peering down from a tree. "Excuse me," Samil asked, "did you see a human here?" The tiny animal did not answer, but cocked its head and twitched its tail. Samil sighed, blowing leaves about the creature. It chittered at her and darted into a hollow of the tree. Some foolish, Samil thought. Talking to other animals was part of her magic. She should have known. It wasn't like animals spoke a humanoid language like common or elvish. She was truly alone and powerless in this world. Dragons weren't supposed to feel powerless. Despite her great size and sharp claws and teeth, she had no magic, no breath weapons, and no flying ability. Perhaps she could still fly if the human weren't on her back, getting sick from flying and making Samil feel it. But Samil didn't want to take the chance and possibly crash again. "Enough!" Samil scolded herself, focusing on the torn grass and unfamiliar tracks. She still had her intelligence. Dragons were far smarter than humans, and she still had her eyes and nose. She would find that human, as much as she hated to admit it. She had to find Talon. The unfamiliar tracks beside Talon's looked too large to be human, and besides, Samil was sure that if they were Talon's friends, they'd have come charging back to capture Samil again. It was possible Talon had been captured by goblins or ogres or some other creature. Just because humans thought they owned Kryn didn't mean they were the only inhabitants, even in this human-infested area, and the tracks looked too irregular to be clad in boots. There even appeared to be claws. Despite her size, Samil found it was easy to walk in the forest. The tracks disappeared every so often as she passed rocky ground, but she always found them quickly again, mostly by the musky scent that accompanied the tracks. Perhaps tracking would not be that difficult, she thought, almost skipping ahead. There was water nearby, too, which served to further lighten her mood. She had been away from water too long. A nice dip would comfort her. Samil followed the tracks to the bank of the stream. Bending her head, she drank deeply, not even noticing the lack of salt this time. After a good long drink, she looked for the tracks on the opposite side. But Samil could find no more trace of the strange clawed footprints for yards in either direction. Samil sat down in the stream with a splash. These creatures were clever. They must have taken Talon into the stream, but instead of going straight across, they had either gone up or downstream. Which way, though? Smil picked downstream and ambled that way, examining the shoreline carefully. There were no signs of tracks. Had she picked the wrong direction entirely? How much time had she wasted? Smil slapped her tail against the water, raising a large wave that rippled to the shores. If only she could fly or talk to the local animals! She would have found Talon ages ago. A sharp, burning pain encircled Smil's front leg. She roared and stuck her leg in the water as deep as it would go, but the pain didn't lessen. It felt as though someone had wrapped a white-hot brand of iron around her scales. Talon, Smil realized, shaking her head. This was her pain, not Smil's. Where was she? Smil looked around, but the dark forest offered no clue to her direction. How could she possibly find Talon? As though answering Smil's question, a thin, far-off sound reached her ears. Still, it was familiar. She had heard that sound when she first captured Talon. The girl was screaming again. This time, though, Talon's screams were not of fear or pain, not the kind of pain Smil felt. Talon was screaming to show Smil her location. The human was not as stupid as Smil had thought. Smil's first instinct was to crash through the woods at top speed in the direction of the cries, but she managed to check herself. Until she knew what held Talon, she had to be stealthy. She soon found the trail again, which was fortunate. As she got closer, she could hear voices as well as screams. She slowed her pace and snuck as quietly as she could through the forest, toward a fire flickering through the trees. "Why won't you tell us what we need to know?" someone shouted with a harsh anger Smil wasn't sure she'd ever heard before. "If you just cooperate, we quit hurting you." "I won't tell you anything about Forest Edge," Talon said. Her voice was still strong. "I won't help you harm my people." There was silence and laughter. "What do we want with Forest Edge? We seek the treasure of Mountain Home." "You fools, you captured someone from the wrong town," exclaimed another voice. "What a waste of time." "She'll waste no more of it." They were going to kill Talon. Not that she cared for the human, but what would happen if Talon died while they still felt each other's pain? With a roar, Smil broke from her hiding spot. There were 4 creatures there, one with a sword pointed at Talon. Smil barreled into that creature and knocked it over, glancing at Talon. There was blood on her head from a wound similar to the one Smil had sustained earlier, as well as a burn mark around one arm and blood running down her shoulder, which explained why Smil's shoulder ached. The shoulder worried Smil the most. She had to get Talon out of there quickly before her captors could do any more damage. Turning to face the creature, Smil gasped. Smil had seen many strange creatures since leaving her home, but she had never even heard of things such as this. They seemed to be some odd meld of human and lizard. They were about the size of large human males, but covered in metallic scales with clawed hands and long, sinuous tails. No human Smil had ever seen had a tail like that. Glittering intelligence shone in their eyes, framed by reptilian facial features. No, not reptiles, Smil realized in horror, seeing their leathery wings. Dragon. Somehow, someone had mixed dragon and human. Smil had no idea such an atrocity existed. "Tell me where the nearest human village is, and I will spare you," she said to the creatures. "This human is under my protection." The creature Smil had knocked over got to his feet. The others looked to him, so he must have been their leader. It never ceases to amaze me. How can relatives of ours come to the defense of these sniveling humans? Smil was somewhat in agreement with the creature, but she had to protect Talon. Her own life depended on it. "Say," said one of the other creatures, peering closely at Smil, "that's one of our kin." "Kin?" Smil blinked at the creatures. What were they talking about? The leader snorted and waved one clawed hand towards Smil. The others advanced towards Smil, weapons raised. Between their battered bits and pieces of armor and their beaten, well-sharpened swords, these creatures looked battle-hardy. With a swipe of one claw, Smil slipped the ropes binding Talon's hands and feet. She doubted the girl could fight, but at least she could pull herself out of harm's way. Meanwhile, Smil whipped her tail across the ground, tripping 2 of the creatures. The move surprised them, and they had little time to recover. Then she leaped into the air and came down hard, snapping the neck of one creature. The body's skin crumbled to dust, leaving only a strange-looking skeleton. The other 3 shouted and backed away. They were afraid of her. At last, someone was afraid of her. Samil roared in triumph. Then a strange vibration began at her feet. What on Kryn? Samil appeared closer at the bones at her feet. They were the source of the vibration. Strange. She never heard of vibrating bones. Bang! The explosion flung Samil backward into a pine tree. For a moment Samil verily thought that perhaps she should have known better, but then for the first time that evening Talon screamed in genuine pain. It took Samil a moment to remember where she was. As she turned her head, something caught her eyes. Crossing her eyes, she looked down her nose and gasped. Fragments of bone had stuck in her face. No wonder Talon screamed. Samil couldn't tell how much damage had been done, but at least she could still see. Fortunately, none of the fragments had hit her eyes. Where were her attackers? A few feet away, one of the creatures cradled an almost detached arm, cursing in pain. The leader, however, was still unharmed. It drew its sword and faced Samil. Foolish bronze, the leader snarled. I'd let stick and foolhardy, like all of our metallic cousins. Go ahead and fight me, but you've seen what happens when we die. For every one of us you kill, you face an explosion. You can't defeat us, not without harming your precious human. Samil glanced back at Talon. The girl was lying on the ground like a beached jellyfish, limp and curled. The pain in her eyes showed how bad Samil had been hurt in the explosion. When Samil turned back, the creatures were running into the forest. She resisted the urge to chase them and instead bent to Talon. You're hurt. Samil could both see on Talon and feel on her own body how much damage the creatures had done to the girl. I know nothing of healing humans, Samil said. Where is the nearest human settlement? Talon closed her eyes, thinking. The Dracalian spoke of a town to the south, she whispered. That's where they're going. We must warn them. There may be others. We have to save you, Samil said. Can you climb on my back? Wincing, Talon pushed herself to her feet as Samil lay down. Talon climbed up and slumped against Samil's wings. Samil folded them over her in case the girl lost consciousness, then began to run southward as quickly as she could without risking Talon falling off. As she ran, the words Talon referred to the creatures with kept repeating in her head. What on Kryn was a draconian? That is the end of Chapter 10.